This episode was sponsored by Property, the leading real estate agent for all real estate transactions with a comprehensive ecosystem. They combine highly trained experts with the latest technologies on an intelligent platform to provide clients, brokers, and service partners with risk-free, flexible, and simplified services. Learn more at property.com. That's property with an I.com.
I think we should not try to compare because, Silicon Valley is quite a unique ecosystem. It has been around for more than 6 decades. And, it's a very unique recipe of collaboration between, the academia with Stanford, for example, and investors and entrepreneurs and large corporates. And this ecosystem took decades to mature, with heavy funding from the US government first, and then, private funding eventually took the helm. But it's a very unique ecosystem. And I think, of course, we should be inspired. We should try to embrace best practices from the Silicon Valley ecosystem, but we should not try to replicate it.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Merle.
I'm sitting here today with Nicolas, who just flew in from Paris, as I've heard. So thank you so much for being here. We're very excited to talk to you today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All things VC. You are a partner at Walden Catalyst Ventures, which is a venture capital firm helping early stage deep tech companies in the US and Europe. And hence you're also traveling around much. And we know that you've been with Walden for 4 years, but a VC actually for many more, like over 15 years. What exactly drew you to the venture capital world, and what would you say makes you a good betting man?
That's a great question. Actually, out of coincidence, I randomly discovered this job. And I think to do that, and actually we have to kind of go back to history. I started doing stock trading when I was 12 with my father. And so I kind of developed an interest for finance very early on. Following companies, picking stocks, trying to make a profit, right? And turns out, at school, I was good at math and physics and science in general. And so I, was being a bit lazy in a way and decided to pursue engineering studies. When I got my degree, 2003, then moved to the US and had the opportunity to join a small seed fund and, randomly discovered the job. And it was really, love at first sight. The perfect combination for between my interest for finance and my interest for science and engineering. And so love at first sight because essentially, you work with entrepreneurs, you learn every day on the job. You discover, fascinating ideas and technologies that, have potential to disrupt the world and, change the lives of many. And for me, it was, fascinating and everything I've done, since then, so since 2003, was really to pursue a career in the VC industry. So, what make me a good betting man? Honestly, I don't know. I guess there is maybe one thing I know is I know how to recognize a good idea when I see one, right? And so there are a number of criteria that we look for in every company in which we end up investing. And, that's sort of things you learn throughout the years by seeing thousands of opportunities. But essentially, there are some key ingredients, some very, commonalities in each and every company, in each and every entrepreneur we decide to invest in. And I guess it really starts with, a disruptive technology, something that is quite unique, that has a long-term defensibility. We want to see very high ambition, ambition to build something global, ambition to build a global category leader. And obviously we want to see drive, high intensity, high ambition in the teams we decide to back. And so when I see, these ingredients, then, it's time to step in. And I've been, extremely lucky to work with extremely talented entrepreneurs, some of whom made it really big, like, Fabien Pinkers at Odoo in Belgium, or Jurgi Camblon at Sophia Genetics here in Switzerland. And I feel blessed, having worked with these people, very humbled by their journey. I learned so much with them. So yeah, I guess that's, my answer to you on that one. I don't know if I'm a good betting man, but, I learned throughout the years how to pick the, what I hope to be right ideas.
How many startups do you have in your portfolio at the moment?
So right now in Europe, we only have 3 companies in the current fund. Maybe to go back to Walden Catalyst Ventures, a few words of introduction. So we're quite a new team on the ground. We set up the firm in 2021 and we've been investing now for 4 years. We come in at early stage, so Series A, B, and C in deep tech companies, especially. We invest across US, Europe, and Israel. And so we are extremely disciplined when we pick our investments. So we've done 3 investments to date in Europe, one in Switzerland called Anybotics in the robotic space. Actually, a second one, which is in between UK and Switzerland in Lugano, called Peptone in the AI drug discovery space. And the last one is a company called Nearfield Instruments in the Netherlands. Overall, out of the fund number 1, we've done, I think now 18 investments across US, Europe, and Israel. But if you take a step back, our team, 7 partners, we've been investing for more than 3 decades globally across US, Europe, Israel, and Asia. And we have invested in more than 600 companies over the years, over the last 3 decades, with I think about 145 IPOs, hopefully more soon. But so, we have quite a substantial track record, and especially in semiconductor and deep tech.
Yeah. So all the expertise combined, basically. And today we want to talk a little about your view as a foreign VC on Switzerland and the potential and hurdles also of investing in Swiss startups specifically. What, upsides and downsides you see in investing in Swiss startups. So I would like to understand from you, firstly, how does the Swiss startup ecosystem compare to other hubs, like maybe Silicon Valley or within Europe, I don't know, Berlin, etc.?
I think it's a great question. I get this question very often, from investors who are, let's say domestic investors, whether, for France or UK or Germany, how do we compare? I think we should not try to compare because, Silicon Valley is quite a unique ecosystem. It has been around for more than 6 decades. And, it's a very unique recipe of collaboration between, the academia with Stanford, for example, and investors and entrepreneurs and large corporates. And this ecosystem took decades to mature, with heavy funding from the US government first, and then, private funding eventually took the helm. But it's a very unique ecosystem. And I think, of course, we should be inspired. We should try to embrace best practices from the Silicon Valley ecosystem, but we should not try to replicate it. Because, Europe and Switzerland are very unique also in their own respects. They have great universities, and we'll talk about it maybe later during the podcast. But here in Switzerland, you have ETH Zurich, you have EPFL, which are, I think, leading universities, not only domestically, not only continentally, but globally. And it's a great pool of talent and research. I think we have a maturing venture of investor ecosystem in Europe. Again, maybe Switzerland is not as developed as other nations in Europe, but it's also maturing quite fast. And I think we start having a flywheel when it comes to entrepreneurs who make it big once and then, let's say, give back to the ecosystem, inspire a new generation of entrepreneurs, invest in new companies, and eventually want to launch, company number 2, company number 3. So Europe and Switzerland is a maturing ecosystem. And I think we have to sort of double down on our uniqueness. I think we have great expertise in robotics. I think we have great expertise in quantum. So we should not be, shy when we compare ourselves to Silicon Valley. We have to find our own recipe and we have to double down on our key strengths.
Would you say deep tech is one of Switzerland's strengths?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we have, a number of companies and success stories in robotics, in AI, in biotech and medtech, in consumer electronics as well. So I think we have a very dense ecosystem of talent, PhD researchers in all these universities, and a new generation of entrepreneurs very eager to build something big and to conquer, the world. And that's what we like. We actually spend a lot of time in Switzerland. So, as mentioned earlier, I'm based in Paris, but I travel to Zurich pretty much once a month. Mm-hmm. We have a couple of portfolio companies here in Zurich or in Switzerland at large. And for us, I would say Switzerland is one of the, powerhouse of deep tech in Europe. Mm-hmm. I spent, my weeks traveling across Europe, Munich, Berlin, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Oxford, Cambridge, London, Paris is home, Lausanne, and Zurich.
Yeah.
Clearly, if you look at, the map of Europe, Switzerland is one of the powerhouses in deep tech. Absolutely.
Do you think, because you mentioned the universities already and also the PhD, the master students, you see all these incredible ideas that come out of these studies and that then go into entrepreneurship. Do you think that maybe also within Europe in comparison, what role do these universities play here in also pushing these people into entrepreneurship?
So I think it's they play a very important role. Mm. And that's essentially one of the best practice we have to learn, I think, from the US, right? In the US, you have, the leading universities, you have IP office, and you have people essentially in charge of creating value of the research that is, coming from the labs. Mm. And that's, I think, something where Europe at large, not only Switzerland, but I think Europe has to accelerate and evolve. 2 points, right? I would say the first one is a mentality thing, trying to encourage PhDs and postdocs and researchers to create companies around the technology, around the IPs they're developing. Mm. That's taking the risk, trying to be bold and create, products and services around their core technology. Mm. That's number one. Number two is more an administrative thing, which is, having a smooth process with universities to negotiate the rights to spin off, to negotiate any licensing of the IPs that could have been developed, and negotiating fair terms. Because when you look at the terms across Europe, it's actually all over the place. Okay. In terms of equity stake, or in terms of licensing, royalty rights. US, it's essentially one single digit ownership that they negotiate in startups. In some European countries, it can go up to 20% or more, which is kind of, killing the business from day one.
Yeah.
So we need to find ways to influence universities that it's in their own interest and benefit to create the right framework for researchers and students to spin off companies from their universities. Here in Switzerland, EPFL, I think, has been probably leading the way, with initiatives like EPFL Launchpad and similar programs where you have a team dedicated to help founders, to help students and researchers create their own companies. You have the EPFL Innovation Park where, Sophia Genetics is based. So this is a great framework. ETH, probably more recently, but, a great initiative, for example, with the ETH AI Center, Alex Illich, I think who's doing phenomenal work federating initiatives and talents and ideas around AI at ETH. And then inviting the rest of the ecosystem. And when I'm saying the rest of the ecosystem, I'm not only talking about local ecosystem. I'm talking about European investors, European corporates, to join and shed light on this initiative and try to create some momentum. So fantastic work, I think, by ETH AI Center. And I think that's, one step on this, fairly long journey. We were talking about Silicon Valley earlier. It's a long journey. Yeah. It's going to take, 1 decade, probably more, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to see these initiatives at university level, because this is where, when you talk about deep tech, this is where it all starts. Because we're talking about fundamental science that is spun out, that makes its way into a startup. The startup uses this, hard science, turns it into a product, and then the product you execute a go-to-market and you start scaling. But it really starts at the university level.
Within this deep tech sector, which field do you think has the most potential to global scalability?
I think, if I look at the talent pool, if I look at the rankings, again, going back to ETH and EPFL, if I look back at the computer science ranking for 2024, I think ETH is top 5 and EPFL is within the top 20. If I look at the engineering rankings, ETH and EPFL are in the top 20 globally. So I think, the ideas and the companies that we're going to see emerge and scale out of Switzerland essentially are coming from that field. AI at large, it's really down to computer science. And when you look at, some of the corporates like Google and Apple opening R&D offices here in Switzerland, it makes sense because this is where the talent is, right? So you start seeing actually people who are leaving Google R&D here in Zurich to set up their own companies, like, the guys at DeepJudge, for example. So AI is one. I think robotics is another one. And I think there is a great connection with precision engineering and all the mechatronics ecosystems that you have here in Switzerland and also in Germany. So this, very tight collaboration between startups and the corporate side, I think is great. Biotech and medtech. I mean, obviously, you have companies like Novartis and Roche, and that also fosters, an entire ecosystem of innovation. And EPFL, I think, in that respect, is probably leading the pack. So I would say, these are probably the 3 top verticals where we see great innovation coming from in Switzerland.
This episode was co-produced by Deep Tech Nation Switzerland Foundation, a non-profit foundation committed to sustainably improving the framework for Swiss startups, scale-ups, and investors in the deep tech sector. Their goals are to mobilize 50 billion Swiss francs in venture capital and create 100,000 jobs within the next 10 years, making Switzerland the world-leading deep tech nation. Check out how they can support your business journey at deeptechnation.ch. Again, that's deeptechnation.ch.
Coming from not from Switzerland, I'm always amazed that in size, it's not a big country, but there are so many things happening that can really support all these different factors that play into this. That's fascinating, I think. Do you have an example of any Swiss startup or scale-up that really impressed you in terms of this innovation and growth?
I think there are plenty, right? If you look at Scandit, for example, in the enterprise software domain, if you look in the robotic space, we're super excited about Anybotics. I'm, also quite excited, even though we're not investors, I'm super excited about Eco-Robotics in the agriculture space out of Lausanne. Very impactful and great revenue traction these days. In the life science space or digital biology space, big fan of Sophia Genetics. When I first met them, I think in 2016, they were doing like $1 million in revenues, and now it's tens of millions of revenues, and the company is listed on the NASDAQ. So these are, some examples of great companies that you have out of Switzerland. And I think many more to come, to be very honest. Again, it's a journey. It's going to take time. But, if I look at the Nordics, for example, Nordics 25 years ago, not much private investment was going into the venture side, right? And then you had MySQL, which was, I think, the first big company and big exit of the Nordics. And then you had Skype. And then you had Spotify. And now you have Klarna. And you start, seeing again this flywheel effect and this acceleration of big companies out of the Nordics. And so with these successes, it's essentially success calls success. Private capital now is, flooding Nordics market because they see generational shift and this flywheel effect in action. Because, entrepreneurs who made it big, they inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs, and they want to give back. So they give back through mentorship, they give back through their own personal wealth, and, they develop an ecosystem, because operators from the former, scale-ups at some point also turn entrepreneurs. So you have, the mafias of Spotify, you have the mafias of Klarna, you have the mafias of Skype, former operators turn entrepreneurs who themselves make it big. And then that's the flywheel effect. I think we're going to see that in Switzerland. It's just a matter of time. And you start seeing, these number of companies I mentioned earlier that are really on the right path to scale globally and become these global category leaders. They get visibility in the Swiss ecosystem. They go on the media, they have these awards, and all of that is inspiring people and giving trust to the ecosystem that we can build something really big out of Switzerland.
When you say we will see this in Switzerland, where do you say is Switzerland at this moment in terms of performance when it comes to international expansion, also comparing, for example, to the Nordics or other peers from other countries?
So I think it's getting there. And again, I think it's a generational shift. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, you didn't have the right generation of entrepreneurs, or let me put it differently. I think the generation of entrepreneurs was probably not as global type of mindset. What we see here now is a generation of entrepreneurs who is between 25 and 35. So essentially people who were born in the 1990s and people who grew up connected. People who grew up with a sense that, they live in a global world. People who grew up under the umbrella of Silicon Valley and all the big tech giants. People who grew up in a world where we celebrate success, we celebrate entrepreneurship. We have, tech icons for good or wrong reasons, right? But, the Mark Zuckerberg and the Elon Musk and the Bill Gates, etc. They grew up with these inspiring figures. And it has become very fashionable, and I'm glad it has become very fashionable to become an entrepreneur after your studies. And so these people, this new generation who grew up with a very international mindset, I think they understand that when they start building something, they need to think globally from day one. Especially in deep tech. Deep tech by nature, by design, are global. Your customers are in the US, they are in Asia, but they're not in your domestic market, except if you're a US company, of course. But if you're a, Swiss company, if you're a French company, if you're a German company, well, you need to go out there. You can't just rely on your domestic market to build something big. You have to go international. And so I think this new generation is ready to do that. And, I can see it, again, with the companies I'm involved here locally in Switzerland, whether it's, Sophia Genetics in the past or Anybotics today or Deep Judge. These guys immediately think big, think global, open offices, commercial offices in the US or in Asia or in other parts of the world, because they understand that if they want to make it big, if they want to scale fast, they have to go international from day one.
So you say that the generation at the moment already has this global mindset, also thinking across borders. But would you say, or do you think that also the cultural upbringing specifically of Swiss startups still somehow holds them back? Because
Sure.
they're said to be more shy, more modest, just within their culture.
No, it's true. I think there is some truth to that, to be very honest. I think in Switzerland, when I very lucky to be able to travel across Europe and also to the US and sometimes to Israel. And so, being able to compare the different business cultures. Clearly in Switzerland, there is a culture of high performance, of precision. And, the break things mentality of Silicon Valley that you probably heard about, you quite don't see it here. Again, there are good things and bad things about it, right? If you think long term, I think it's good to be able to, or to be willing to do the right thing and do it really well. But sometimes, sure, you want to take, fast track and push people, beyond their boundaries, beyond their culture of conservatism that you probably have in Switzerland more than you would have it in the UK or in Germany or in France. But, when it comes to deep tech, it's a long-term journey. When we look at what we've done over the years, 600 companies invested, the average holding time is something like 8 years. It takes time to build big companies, but I think more importantly, long-lasting companies, which is, the business we're in. We don't want to invest in companies that, go through the roof, 18 months, you're out, and then, the company collapses, like, many of the companies we've seen in quick commerce, for example, which I feel personally disgusted about, but that's another debate. We are in for the long run, and it takes time, patience, discipline. You want to be very precise in everything you do. So, and I think that fits quite nicely with, of course, the culture here in Switzerland. But sure, sometimes, you have to push people to go a bit faster. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, it's about speed and scale, right? So people have the ambition to scale globally, but sure, speed can be a bit of a topic sometimes.
And maybe also just a tad of flexibility when you notice, okay, within this market, the product needs to be slightly different. So we need to also adapt.
Absolutely.
The business model or the product itself, maybe, to the market. And what about structural barriers? Do you think there's something which needs to be changed in the system itself?
I think, there are lots of smart capital available at early stage. Pre-seed, seed, Series A. Lots of business angels, lots of great early stage funds, people like Founderful, B2V, Swisscom, Verve, etc. So lots of capital available to fund the company's early stage. I think where we lag maybe a bit behind in Switzerland is late stage funding for deep tech. But rest assured, Switzerland is no exception. That's a problem we have everywhere in Europe. And I'm saying that because, obviously I'm following also the local initiatives in other countries. So, for example, in France, we have BPI France, which is, the French sovereign fund. You have British Business Bank in the UK. You have KfW in Germany and InvestNL in the Netherlands and EIF at the European level. And what I found is that these players are instrumental in the maturing process of the ecosystem. They've been, funding entrepreneurs, but also funds. And today, if you look at, most of German funds or French funds, they have KfW or BPI as an LP. I think that's probably what we miss here in Switzerland is a late stage fund or late stage funds focused on deep tech that can essentially pick up opportunities that are funded by their colleagues at early stage and then provide the capital to scale. I think there are great initiatives in Switzerland. I think Dominique Maigret wrote a book, Deep Tech Nation Switzerland, right? Which was essentially, I think, a book about celebration of Switzerland potential and talent. And all these big companies that Switzerland has built over the years, we mentioned, Nestlé and Roche and Novartis and ABB. So clearly, you have a history of building large corporates which are category leaders globally. You have amazing universities and talent. You have smart early stage capital. Now we need to fix the next step, which is providing the fuel, providing capital to scale early stage startups and create the next generation of global category leaders. And so the initiative that was announced, I think maybe about a year ago, Deep Tech Nation Switzerland, that was, inspired after this book, I think really goes into the right direction. I think it sets an ambition and tries to gather all key stakeholders towards a common goal, which is make Switzerland a land of deep tech leadership.
So maybe also a question of the government's support on innovation, because I think if you start out, it's a great place to start in Switzerland. There's so many opportunities and initiatives. But like you said, when you are further and you want to expand and you want to grow and you want to scale, then it would also be interesting to have governmental buckets that can support that.
Yeah. And I can really, testify that, the in other countries, so Germany, France, UK, Netherlands, the impact of this initiative, of this government-backed initiative, was absolutely phenomenal.
I want to talk about something that you mentioned before. You already mentioned the long development cycles. I think you mentioned 8 years, more or less. How do you, as a VC, balance this risk also is associated with investing in such long-term development cycles?
Sure. So there, number of things or key ingredients we look for, right? I mentioned a bit earlier. Disruptive technology, very unique, robust, protected, so that it gives you really a long-term defensibility over what you do. That's number one, right? Number two is we want to go after very deep markets. And, markets that give an opportunity to build something global and something big, right? Number three, we're looking for teams that are world-class. So in other words, teams that really come from leading academic centers, ETH, EPFL, Oxford, Cambridge, TU Munich, TU Berlin, École Polytechnique, ENS, that's for Europe. But in the US, we work very closely with Stanford, with Berkeley, with MIT, with Carnegie Mellon, or with Technion in Israel. But we also want to see good operational experience. So not only researchers, who have been working on state-of-the-art research, but also people that come from the business world, who actually know what it is to build a product and sell a product and scale a company. The last thing we're looking for is a great syndicate of investors. We like to lead our co-lead rounds, but we never invest alone. And we want to partner with funds who have deep pockets, funds who understand technology as well as we do, funds who can bring operational and business expertise to the company. And the reason is, when you look at all these deep tech companies, particularly in the hardware side, all of them will require very significant funding, 100 million plus. So if you're alone around the table, or if you don't have enough, money to deploy, it just doesn't work, right? You will run out of cash. It's just a fact. And so, there are a couple of companies, for example, in the US, where first day of the company, a company called Rivos in the semiconductor space, for example, we invested 125 million. It was a 125 million round, which we led. And since then, the company has raised another 250. And, there will probably be more money coming in the company this year. It just gives you an idea of the scale of funding required for some of these deep tech companies. And so when you want to de-risk your investment in that category, I think you need to look after these, ingredients. Tech, how robust, how unique, how disruptive, how defensible it is. The market, do we have an opportunity to build something really big here? Because, that market opportunity will also be a key driver for investors to join the round. The caliber of the team, the profile of the team, its ability to lead, to be thought leaders on the technology, but also great operators executing by the book, the roadmap. And finally, the quality of the syndicate of investors around the table. And if you are extremely disciplined evaluating these 4 criteria, then you maximize your chances of success, or you minimize your chances of failure, whatever you want to see it. But that's how we approach risk when we invest.
Do you have specific metrics behind these criteria?
No, we don't.
No?
No. Many investors, investing in SaaS companies, in enterprise software, plain B2B SaaS, would look at ARR and retention metrics and cost of acquisition, etc. When you look at a semiconductor company developing a new, processing architecture, or when you invest in a company developing new drugs using AI, or when you look at, the last large language model company, there is no commercial traction. And so no key metrics to, put your teeth on and to evaluate the quality of the company. So it really comes down to what's the technology. And so for us, it's really the starting point. diving deep into the technology. And then, the market opportunity, is it a big one or not? And then the quality of the team, really assessing the potential, the appetite of the team to build something big. And then, of course, it's our job to, if we get convinced about these first 3 criteria, our job is eventually to convince others to join the round.
What's the ratio between you scouting startups and you receiving?
Oh, wow. So we get a lot of inbound. It's not a secret that usually inbound is not high quality. And so, my job, on the contrary, is to actually go out there and create outbound opportunities. So I travel a lot across Europe to connect with local investors who invest at seed stage or Series A stage, and to eventually build these relationships with early stage investors so that I have a prime access to their portfolio companies when they fundraise next. Turns out, I would say probably 95%, if not more, of the deals we make come from our network and come from these, trusted relationships we have with early stage VCs and business angels.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess also for you, I mean, if you know where it comes from and if it's through the network, then it already has gone through this first criteria phase, kind of, right?
Yes, yes.
And in your personal opinion, how would you say can Swiss startups better attract also foreign investment and talent, maybe even to fuel their growth?
So, I think talent is not so much of an issue. I mean, maybe on the operator side, but, I think on the science side, on the tech side, I think the pool of talent here is really amazing. It's world class. Okay, let's put it this way. It's world class. I think on the operator side, again, if I compare it to other countries, I think Switzerland is no different. I think that's probably where Europe needs to top up its game. I think compared to the US is, have this generation of experienced operators who've done it once and are available to do it twice, 3 times, etc. So this flywheel, it's starting to kick off, right? In deep tech, I think it's at full speed when you talk about shallow tech or regular tech, the consumer tech and fintech. It's at full speed because you have repeat stories. In deep tech, it's just starting, right? I think we just released a report last week with our friends at Lakestar and Dealroom. It's a European Deep Tech Report 2025. It's a yearly publication we do. And we address that very specific topic of the flywheel. So I think, technical talent pool here, world class, operator improving, flywheel in action. And so, how to attract more late stage funding? Well, by building these success stories, back to my example about the Nordics earlier, success calls success. And once you have, these big scaleups, which at some point become global category leaders, the spotlight will be turned to Switzerland and you'll have, international investors, and it's happening already today, scouting Swiss market, looking for the next big things and starting to allocate, funding to that particular geography. And everything that the local ecosystem is doing to promote innovation and shed light on the scale-ups in Switzerland will help that. The Start Summit conference in St. Gallen, you see already, if you look at this year edition on the speakers, you see lots of Americans more than before. All this initiative that Alex is doing at ETH AI Center to promote innovation out of ETH or, EPFL Launchpad or EPFL Innovation Park. All of that is helping elevate Switzerland visibility in the deep tech ecosystem globally, I think.
And what advice would you give specific to founders if they want to grow also internationally?
Sure. So, think internationally from day one. So in everything you do, think global. Success is all about speed and scale. When I was mentioning earlier, we should not try to replicate Silicon Valley, but try to be inspired and eventually adopt best practices. When you talk to VCs and entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley, they all say the same thing, speed and scale. So think big, think globally, be super focused on execution, don't get distracted, and hopefully, you'll build something big.
I think these are great words to finish our conversation. Thank you so much for all these insights. I thought it was super interesting, and I'm really excited to see who you scout next.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. It was very much fun.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.